the Thursday, February 5th Special Education Advisory Committee. To call this meeting to order. First, we're going to start with the land acknowledgements. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located today. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas and Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, live, and learn. Next, I'd like to start with our roll call, starting with regrets. We have regrets from Trustee Kevin Miller, from Chair Eagle Kyriakides for Association for Children, Allison Eameyer, Easter Seals, and was with Daniel Third and I think Stephen joining us list.
Yeah, that we get over. Thank you. That we hope.
Okay, otherwise I will start with the roll call to my left.
I'm Donna Edwards, trustee for Ajax. Jessica Wells, member at large.
Shauna Haley, my representative for Green Kids Family Advisory Committee.
Erin Lee Marie Fellon, representative of Durham District School Board. Lindsay Clay, secondary school Durham representative.
Joe Wrigley, System Lead Services.
Charmaine Brown, representative for Ontario Parents of Vision Impaired Children.
Jen McLaughlin, representative of Sabona Afrocentric Services. Spencer Renette Burrow, representative of Autism Ontario.
Lisa Rye, reporting. Lauren Bliss, superintendent of education and inclusive student services.
Tara Kelly, Durham District Down Syndrome Association and vice chair. And online with us today, we have our new member at large. Lyle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good evening, Lyle Williams, member at large for the first time.
Fantastic. We are very happy to have you. Right. Moving on to item number 4, approval of the agenda. Has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda? Any questions? No. Can I get a motion to approve? Donna, second. Jonna, all in favor? Oh. Right. And then we'll move on to the minutes from January 8th. Does anybody have any items to mention right up for January 8th minutes? Okay, seeing none, could I get a motion to approve the minutes from January 8th? Jessica, seconds. Donna. All in favor? Thank you. Moving on to item number 6 then, with the staff report.
Okay, I'll start us off with our multi-year strategic plan update, and Ali has a video for us that he's going to share. Ali, if you don't have sound in here. Oh.
System. We honored Hindu culture through captivating performances, delicious food, and rich historical sharings led by the Durham educators of South Asia.
I'm very sorry. Let's try again from the top.
Thank you.
We're excited to share a sample of stories that highlight our multi-year strategic plan pillar of well-being. 6 DDSB Empower Excellence schools are currently in the 3rd year of a partnership with Apple Schools. Apple Schools is a Canadian nonprofit empowering school communities to prioritize health and wellness and promote healthy eating, active living, and mental well-being. Students recently received a gift of 260 backpacks filled with school supplies. The DDSB Youth Liaison Worker Program continues to make a significant impact on our students, especially those that are looking for extra support. This program, along with community resources, has helped build networks, strengthen skills, and foster positive relationships for student success and well-being. Across DDSB, communities came together to celebrate the vibrant diversity that strengthens our system. We honored Hindu culture through captivating performances, delicious food, and rich historical sharings led by the Durham Educators of South Asians, DENSA, and the Hindu Affinity Network of Durham, HAND. Thanks to Shalom Durham, we experienced the joy of Jewish traditions through a meaningful Lakha celebration. These moments reflected a shared commitment to learning from one another and celebrating the cultures that make our communities thrive. Our well-being facilitators support educators to develop strong knowledge and evidence-informed practices related to promoting a positive school climate and prioritizing mental health for every student. The focus of the role has been on educator capacity building to embed mental health promotion as part of their daily instructional practices. Across Durham, our schools, staff, families, and community partners are coming together with incredible generosity to make the holidays brighter for those who need it most in our community. Through IDLF's Ignite the Holidays program, this collective care is turning compassion into action by providing thoughtful gifts, warm winter clothing, groceries, and essential supports, ensuring children, youth, and their families feel seen, supported, and uplifted during a challenging season. The next student census survey that will take place this year provides an opportunity for students to share valuable information that helps us better understand our communities, identify barriers to success, and improve student engagement and well-being. This important survey allows our students to help shape experiences and outcomes that allow everyone to thrive. Sewing Studio Week at R.H. Cornish Public School showed how powerful learning can be when creativity, collaboration, and care come together. As students stitched and problem-solved side by side, they learned that words of encouragement build confidence, strengthen connections, and help create a school community where everyone feels valued and inspired.
Thank you to Natalie from Ajax High School for reading this month's MYSP update.
Thank you. So a few other highlights we wanted to bring forward. On February 19th, the Uxbridge Secondary School will be hosting the inclusive culinary skills competition again this year. Which is an amazing event. For those of you that have not heard about it before, the event is similar to our skills competition, but it is designed for students in our adaptive learning programs. So the purpose of the day is for them to showcase their cooking skills, and they're definitely celebrate their achievements. So it's a large group of individuals come up to watch. There's a gallery where you can watch them cook. And they have students from mainstream programming coming alongside to help the students. And it's just, they all have their own chef hats and chef coats. They get real chef coats, and it's just a beautiful day. So that's happening on February 19th this year. And Joe has been very busy out in schools collecting some data around gifted review. So I just wanted him to have an opportunity to share a few updates on how things have been going.
So thanks everyone for the opportunity to share tonight. So just as a very quick update, and first of all, a thank you to the members of the SEAC working group who, in collaboration with other departments and staff here in the DDSB, helped to put together some questions, some surveys. We have been actively engaged in listening sessions so far at 2 schools. We've completed our listening sessions at Jack Minor and Drake Creek. We are heading to EG Bell tomorrow afternoon, which will be 3 of the 6 sites that we want to visit over the next few weeks. And the surveys have been sent out to those students after. And so far from students, we already have over 150 responses and over 100 responses from parents. So it's getting, it appears to be a very robust level of engagement. And just as an aside, it was really fun to get to go and connect with the kids. It was great. One of the highlights so far of my time before. So thank you.
Yes. Search that update.
Any questions about the staff report?
I just wanted to comment on the color. It's great, and I know that there was a bit of work having the skills program come in, see if we could actually make that into a skills session for across the province. And I'm wondering if there's anything has happened with that at all.
I don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly find out.
Yeah, because I know
I can
there's
ask.
some dialogue there.
Sure.
Because it is a fantastic day, absolutely amazing day.
Please tell me we're going to have a video.
I'm sure we always have a video, so
Because
Yeah.
it's the best. It's the best, absolute best to see that. Seeing no other questions or comments, then we move on to item number 7, board report. Scott.
There wasn't there wasn't a heck of a lot on the agenda. There was basically information item. We did have a presentation from families who on the boundary consultation for one of the new Oshawa schools. A group of parents came and did a presentation on that, which will be taken into consideration when they develop the proposed boundary forward for decision. And we did have basically a memo around basically the upcoming symposium and how some of the data that we requested as a board is going to fit into the various different sessions that will be released. Eventually there will be a follow-up with report. So that's really, really great to see some of the achievement data that we're looking at. To ensure that our programming is being successful, meets students' needs. Let's see. The student trustees, of course, are always busy with their senate, and they have actually had a discussion with Durham Region Transit Services and representatives, as well as Durham Student Transit Services, basically and have presentations from both, and they asked really thoughtful questions, and basically gave their insights as far as their perspective around transportation, and they really did had shared their concerns really around student transportation and meeting and bridging the gap between students and transit services and authorities, right? So they did a really, really great job there. And then just so you know, I attended the Ontario Public School Board Public Education Symposium, where the minister was invited, but he did not come. And which is open, it was opened to not only trustees, but also to other staff members of the boards as well this time. And we had quite a bit of engagement around conversations around the role of trustee and sort of Bill 33. But we also had the ability to attend different workshops, and one that I've already relayed some of the information was I attended a workshop from Hamilton Wentworth, who has it's not really a small class placement, it's more like a resource room that they have that are staffed for students who have regulation challenges, and they've managed to implement it into 27 schools. And so it's it's not a permanent small class placement, but it's how they rotate stuff. So I can pass that information on to Lauren as far as that's concerned. It's just how to further investigate how maybe they do, because I know we used to have a resource room up in the north, but one of the things how it was staffed and how it's funded is really good. So I'm curious to see what they do. So it was really an interesting endeavor. We also I actually listened to a joint project in Lakehead and the Green two board, Lakehead District School Board and Reedstone, Superior Reedstone District School Board. And it was basically around Indigenous skills trades training and a pathway to student success. And it basically had brought all the partners together. And they actually built one part of the programs that they built greenhouses that are actually then put into the community, and students have the opportunity to do plumbing, to do electrical, to build trusses, to do everything. But it's basically also deals with if a student is having challenges that day and they feel like they want to do some arts, they actually put art into the homes, the mini homes and so forth. So it's really quite endeavor, and it was really heartwarming to hear from one of the students how this program has changed her path, and she's basically going on to post-secondary education as well as to hear the chief of the First Nations there speak on how their beliefs and how their culture has been incorporated into the program so well. So it was really interesting, but it was two boards that I have been, working at, and it's they also have, it's also funded by a private construction sort of building company as well, but it was really quite the program. So that's where we hear a lot of other things about the boards they're doing, meeting their multi-year strategic plan. And then, of course, OPSPA has done, even though there wasn't an education pre-consultation, which they normally do because they put a pause on that, we still did submit a funding submission, and it can be read or obtained through the OPSPA website, and I can pass it on so that members here can see what it is part of this discussion, because there is a big section on special education this time.
Excellent. Any questions for Donna in regards to the board form? All right, seeing none, we will move on to item number 8, our presentation on the PQAO results.
Okay. And that's your. Thank you. And Joe, whenever you're ready. Okay, so we now have PQAO data from our 2024, 2025 results. So I wanted to bring them forward to SEAC to have a look at. So we start with, these are our provincial results. What you're looking at on the screen here is the grade 3 reading, writing, and mathematics results over the trends over the last few years. So we're looking at the 2024, 2025 data. You can see provincially 49% in reading, 36% in writing, and 33% mathematics. And what I wanted to do is just show you how, as a system, the district is doing in comparison to the provincial standards or the provincial average. So Joe, if you could flip to the next slide, and I'll bring you back to the provincial results, because I know it's hard to look back and forth. But so we're going to be focusing on the bottom row in each of these sections. So it's grade 3 reading, writing, and math is what you're looking at. Bottom section is students who have an IEP, and the results trending from 2021 to last year. So provincially, we had students provincially at 49% in reading in grade 3. Our students here in Durham were 47%. We had a 7% increase from the year before. In writing, provincial average was 36%. We're at 31%, a slight decline from the previous year. And for math, the provincial average was 33%. We were sitting at 37% and saw a 7% increase from the previous year. So we have some early improvements, and that's reflecting the implementation of our evidence-based literacy practices. including structured literacy, vocabulary development, targeted small group instruction for our students, and specific numeracy routines that build fluency and confidence. So we recognize we need to continue our attention to deepen and sustain this growth. And we recognize that overall achievement for our students with IEPs remains lower than the broader student population. We do have that upward trend, and that's really based on that strengthened foundational practices that are beginning to take hold. So what you're seeing now on your screen is the junior division results, grade 6, same thing, reading, writing, and math. So 64, 61, and 23 respectively. And then I'll have Joe share our DDSB results. So we had 56% in reading, provincial was 64. So a little bit lower there for our system, but consistent with last year's results. Math in grade 6 was 61 provincially, 55% for DDSB. That was writing, my apologies. And math, 19%, similar to last year. Provincial average was 23%. So we can see that our grade 6 reading outcomes stayed similar to last year, but below provincial results. Writing outcomes improved a little bit, and our math remained consistent. We're slightly below provincial results, and this is an area of focus for the district. And next steps have been clearly outlined in our USB or the math action plan. And the transition from a foundational number concept to more abstract reasoning is some of the work that we're doing. But again, a main focus in the math action plan, and happy to share that at a future meeting if there was interest from SEAC to learn more about the math action plan. We do see that students with IEP showed improvement in writing and stable results in math. While this cohort remains again below the overall student population, the gains suggest that the language supports that we have in place, accommodations and explicit instruction are having a positive effect. And then we have our grade 9 assessment. So this is a math assessment that takes place in grade 9, and we have 32% provincially. And for us here in the district, what I did is I grouped the math language together. So what you just saw was math, which was 32%. And now you're looking at the OSSLT results. Students have the opportunity to write once. So we can see that students who have an IEP had 63% success rate on their first opportunity to write. And then second opportunity, if they had to write again, 40% of those were successful. If you compare that to how we did on our first writing of the test, I can share that information from a DDSB perspective. So Joe, thank you. So we had grade 9 math, we had 34% of our students who were successful. That in comparison to 32% average for the province. And on our OSSLT for the first time writing, that the provincial average was 63%, we had 64%. So what I wanted to do is I can share a little bit about what we're doing as a system. I think it's important to share with you the overall sort of picture of how we're focusing on and supporting students. And then we do have Aaron, Lee, and Lindsay who brought some information today to talk to you, because I think it's really important to hear actually what's happening, because there's system approach and then there's what's actually happening on the ground. So they're going to share a little information there. So based on what we see in terms of the EQAO and OSSLT results, they will continue to guide our system and our school planning. The following next steps really focus on strengthening the instructional coherence for our system. And the foundational work to that really is student well-being. And we need that in place in order to advance achievement in literacy and mathematics. So what's interesting right now is we have a collaboration happening between the teaching and learning team, the curriculum leads, and myself and the ISS team. So we are co-planning, coming together to do the work and moving forward. So there's collaborative professional development planning that's happening. And we're developing and implementing system-wide initiatives, and a few of those I'll just share a few with you so that you have a sense of those. So in terms of strengthening the foundational literacy and early learning structures for the board, so we're really working on early interventions and literacy practices, thinking about explicit instructions in phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, kindergarten to grade 3. Expanding the professional learning that's really connected to the revised kindergarten curriculum and the revised language curriculum. And again, structured literacy and UDL are foundational to that work. And then regular progress monitoring. So really making sure that we're using data that we're collecting from students to drive instruction and small group interventions for students. In terms of math, we're really looking at deepening high impact strategies and math routines for all students. And again, directly aligned to our math achievement plan. And we have very clear direction that's outlined in our school achievement plans that administrators within schools are using to monitor progress for students. So how are they collecting data about students? What are they doing with that data? How that transfers to what's happening in the classroom for students and the interventions in those classrooms. So really those focused interventions. And then one of the pieces that we've really been starting to work on is the transition of support for transitions for students from grade 8 to grade 9. So really looking at cross-panel collaboration, coming together to really get a sense of student experience and what they need in that transition, and then diagnostic information, personalized instructions for our students, specifically those who are supported by an IP. And then reinforcing that literacy instruction. One of the things that we're noticing is there are a group of students who are grade 7 to 12 in that range who are struggling with foundational literacy skills. And so really looking at what we can do to support those individual students. So really professional learning that's strengthening explicit reading and writing instruction across not just the language subject areas, but across all subject areas in secondary. Expanding literacy supports for students with IEPs and ensuring instruction is responsive to language development and looking at the profile of the individual student. And then really monitoring that OSSLT readiness and then some of the targeted interventions you're going to hear a little bit about from Lindsay in a second here. So those are really the overarching structures that we're looking at as a system on how to approach, but I'll turn it over to Erin Lee and Lindsay about what actually happens in there. So it's going to be Erin Lee first, I think there. Who's going to talk a little bit about what's happening for grade 3 and 6.
Yeah, so the way that we support students across their stage, primarily with creating sort of optimal conditions for learning, start with understanding their identity so that their identity is really visible within our classrooms. So we do that first and foremost. We spent a lot of time in September where we focused primarily on creating what they thought would be their ideal classrooms. So we actually had activities which we directly worked with students on in every single classroom from kindergarten all the way up to grade 8. We moved on and we followed up with the ideal school. So we really honed in on student voice. We create a lot of inquiry learning. So student voice is gleaned from inquiry learning. We also have peer leaders in our schools. So we really working towards sort of leadership aspects, most specifically about building up belonging and inclusion and how they can support our younger population. So usually our peer leaders are the older students within the school. We bolster that up. There is a conference called the TAMI Conference, which I had the privilege of taking my students to, where they kind of really teach a lot of those leadership skills, which then come back to the school. And then we can think of ways in which we can bolster up some of those really important skills for those students. We intentionally incorporate representation with a lot of the literacy components, sort of our mentor texts. Some of our we use the Sankofa resources. We have a lot of different resources now, which we are purposefully spending money within our school budgets in order to make sure that when we are doing a more wholesome literacy unit, each day we have a block that is given to our students every day. So we've spent a lot of intense time working on sort of the foundational skills of phonemes and phonetics. Now we are bolstering up some more of the curriculum. So instead of just focusing primarily on strand B, we're now expanding into the other strands within our curriculum as well to kind of bolster up more of our components of literacy as well. So some of the resources that we have been using, which started this year and late of last year, is called Visible Learning. And this is through Hattie. So Hattie also, I'm not sure if you've seen this resource, but it's talking about a lot of the big ideas in visible learning. So one of the effect sizes for our most high impact learning strategies, we can actually glean from just scanning this QR code. There's actually 350 teaching strategies that we can incorporate, but there's various effect ranges, and our aim is to go towards the 0.40 effect or above target, which means they're the highest impact strategies. So particularly in literacy, some of the ones that we're incorporating is feedback. So throughout, when we're talking about literacy, it would be more of the process in the writing as opposed to just the product. So we're assessing throughout the entire writing process. Scaffolded, we're using writing frameworks. For grade 1 to 6, we essentially use the TEAC writing format. And then in order to prepare them to launch into secondary, we move forward into our SEAC paragraph writing framework. We incorporate CRP, so culturally relevant tasks, texts into our intentional learning models. And another really important high impact learning strategy is our gradual release of responsibility. So we have our I do, we do, you do, practice, practice, practice. So that it's scaffolded, which supports all of our learners, but most especially essential for our students with identifications. We have UDL, which is utilized throughout the system as well. We have a few books that we rely heavily on, which is our Universal Design for Learning, 100 Ways. We also have our anti-racism Universal Design for Learning, which is also really great for prioritizing some comprehension and stuff like that for language and honoring our students, giving them opportunities to see themselves within text and how to do that. We focus on, with our older students, we're really focusing on summarizing and note-taking, something that they're going to be needing and requiring as a skill for when they move into high school. And that explicitly distills sort of the information so that they can study and hold on to some of those concrete learning opportunities for them. Some of the resources that we use sort of digitally that help target sort of our second tier intervention systems for some of our students that require more than just tier 1 interventions. Our Lilo, Lexia is a really common, really well used resource from grade 1 to grade 8. And we have TeachTown, and we also have the Vault, which is also really been utilized, not in all of our schools, but in a number of schools where it provides sort of the learning opportunity for students to practice the format of what an EQAO would be, but it's just preparing them in such a way that we're able to access what they know instead of the task of how to get there. Some of our high interest impact strategies for math are Never Talks, Math Think Alouds. The CRA is the format for scaffolding for math. So we start with concrete manipulatives, moving forward to drawings, and then to symbolic numbers. So that's the scaffolding approach, which relates to the I do, we do, you do, which we do in both literacy and math to prepare students, not just for EQAO, but to give them all of those skills in order to be successful moving forward. We have targeted intervention groups. So we use the MTSS approach where we incorporate our literacy coaches, math coaches. We have our literacy facilitators. We have MLL coaches that come in. I just had a great conversation with our MLL coach. I work really collaboratively. Most of our, like all of our administrators work in alignment with creating professional development for our staff through our collaborative release days, which come through 3 times a year. And in elementary, I know in the schools that I've worked at, literacy is the #1 focus. However, we are bridging between both. So I do know that it is sort of a collaboration between literacy and math. We're trying to incorporate some SEL along with executive functioning, targeted explicit teaching. As we know, if we want to have the foundational skills of literacy at an early age, we need to have that foundation created. So just to give you an example, the reason why we do that targeted intervention, the targeted explicit teaching of some of the executive functioning skills is, for one example, would be working memory. If you're trying to teach the sounds, the phonemes in particular, and you have to learn to blend, we need to be able to hold on to what those sounds are in order to do that next step, which is blending. So sounds in isolation require less cognitive load than when you have to hold on to and require that working memory in order to get that to flow. We also work on setting goals, which is really important. And we have to explicitly teach that as well. So right from kindergarten all the way up to grade 8, that is another necessary skill that gets us working towards understanding what our goals will be. We collaboratively do that with the support of our CERTs and of our EAs and all of the personnel within our buildings. And we directly teach that with examples, one-to-one conferences, and we progress monitor those things as well. So executive functioning has a direct link to our learning skills, which is the front matter of our report cards, which essentially is equally important as what we need to prepare and use in order to get our students ready for development and progress in literacy and math as well. So our job is to uncover and prioritize by having fireside chats with our staff. So we have intentional meetings where we do go through the data that they have collected with regards to our diagnostic assessments that we do before units are being taught, and we progress monitor through the entire process of all of our units, and that is how, as administrators, we are monitoring through the process. We also have, in our release days, we allow the collaborative model is just so absolutely important. So we have like grade team teachers looking through and moderating student works. They're able to support assessment between each other, and then do a lot of modeling feedback between each other as well. So sometimes when we're giving it a go, trying something new, a new strategic way to teach a skill, we try and do that in collaboration with each other, so that that partnership, along with administrators, CERT, and all of our in-school team, works together in order to make sure that we have a really precise method to which we're trying to access learning for all. So that's where we're trying to access as much as possible. And when we don't quite get there, that's why feedback amongst each other in our staff meetings, in our release days, our professional development days, those are times where we really, really value the collaborative partnerships. So we bring in our area team members who have a lot of different expertise, and we leverage all of that as well. So that's how we strategically imagine and prioritize the different areas to which we need to focus within our buildings. And that might look a little bit different throughout the system, but the holistic lens to which we want our students to succeed and cross their own stage at their own rate, and we want to make sure that we celebrate that. So that's, in a nutshell, what elementary is like at the time.
Lindsay's going to give us a little overview of secondary.
Thank you, Lauren. So one of the most common, the focus of the secondary panel is really, I would say, on on how students are feeling with wellness and feeling humanized in their education, especially when we're talking about literacy and numeracy and really finding their space and place in classrooms. And for the exceptional learner, we know that often that transition to the secondary panel comes with a lot of anxiety, particularly around that, about how that's going to look and feel for them coming from the elementary panel. And so that's where we put a lot of our focus as educators and administrators within that secondary panel, is on that wellness and feeling like they have a sense of belonging and success as we make that transition. Now, this is just, I'm going to touch on this slide very briefly. One of the first questions that we often get in the secondary panel is, when we actually write the test, what's that going to look like for those supports? So I just breezed through a couple of those key ones here. I know that that's not the focus of this portion of our talk, but please do know that EQAO has come a long way in terms of how accommodations are built into that platform naturally for all learners. So it did used to be, if we think back 10 or 11 years ago when we were invigilating this, and it wasn't even the digital format of the test, it was on paper. In order for students to receive some of these accommodations, it had to be very intentional from the staff who were putting forward for those. Now, with it being in an online platform in that typical format, these things are all built in for all learners. So it does need a lot of those accommodations of IEPs as students are transitioning into that second panel. So these are just a few of the most common ones that we see. And a very familiar piece just for any of the parents in the room or caregivers is that these accommodations are always consistent with the IEPs that students have been practicing in other areas of assessment in both literacy and numeracy. And then these are some of the things that might be a little bit unique when we talk about how we are supporting our learners and how teachers as caregivers are really moving forward with their success intentionally. So one of the most important things that we do is familiarity. We know that test anxiety for students with exceptionalities is a big thing. And so the opportunity for them to see the platform, understand what it looks like, dabble with it in a risk-free way is a huge part of how we move our learners forward with finding success on these tests. There is always supplementary help within the schools. And at the secondary level, we really try for students to have that level of advocacy as to what works for them. So it's very flexible and it looks different in different spaces, whether that's an academic resource space, whether that's lunchtime help, whether that's before or after school help, or one-to-one support through an EA. Those are all places that students tend to tap in to closing some of those gaps. We also have amazing programs through Durham Continuing Education, which are separate funded. Schools can apply. All of these pieces I'm going to are through data informed best practices. So I have the privilege of working at the secondary equivalent of an empowering excellence school or a priority school. And so we apply for these grants so that we can have qualified teachers who come in to support our students. And again, we target and make sure priority space goes to students with exceptionalities in terms of that gap closing leading into our EQO test that we write biannually. Erin Lee touched on the VALT program. This is new to us in the secondary panel. We have a couple of schools who are piloting it. It's fantastic. Again, when we talk about familiarity, it's an opportunity for students to see what EQAO style questions look like, which we recognize is not always in alignment with how math curriculum is taught at that grade 9 level. So again, a really meaningful way to continue to inform instruction for students to do well. And as has been tapped in and as Lauren shared with us at the beginning, everything that we do in the secondary panel is specific to our school-based data. And we try and tier our approaches to the different achievement levels that we see year to year. One of the things that I can speak to that's happening in my school, and for anyone listening, this is by no means across the system yet, but I do hope we get there. We recognize that for students, there's a lot of testing, particularly in math, that happens right near the end of term. And so the window for EQAO happens right around the same time as summatives happen. And so you've got your end of unit, whatever that last unit is, assessment, and then students are preparing for EQAO and the anxiety is coming around that. And then usually within a week of that, they have a final summative that's worth anywhere between 10 to 30%. And so at our school and a few others around the system, we've actually trialed replacing the final exam with the EQAO assessment, which the ministry mandated as a basic 10%, to see if that helped alleviate some of that test prep and anxiety at the end of term. And so we're just getting our results back to see how that is, but we've had really positive feedback from both the staff and the students about how that's felt for them. So excited to see where that goes. And then again, has been touched on here, there's a lot of intentional funding and practice that's going into the collaboration between our board staff and educators in sessions where we are co-planning and co-teaching and having two individuals within the house working with students in small group settings to really be mindful of where we may see deficits coming from our elementary panel and in terms of their learning and gap closing, and then how we build from that within our school teams. And then briefly for the OSSLT, and I will wholeheartedly admit that my portfolio is numeracy at this time, so I'm a little bit more current on some of those practices, but tapped in to my administrator colleagues with some of the things that we're doing. So again, familiarity is key here. Please know that in secondary, there are lots of options, and these are decisions that are made intentionally with families and students around deferral. Okay, so depending on where your children are at, very much goes into how we decide who writes and when. So again, with their best intentions and success in mind. I don't believe that there is many spaces or students where they've been unsuccessful after first or second attempt that they are ever in risk of not graduating. There are a multitude of ways that we make sure that we safety net students to get that diploma requirement. The OLC course is one of them. Whether it's timetabled or done in summer school, these are options to support students with finding success with this requirement. The maze is a new thing that we're testing out in the secondary panel. It is a low risk assessment. It's a one-pager. Everyone can do it in a very short amount of time. And this is where one of those other places that we gather data in a secondary panel in the grade 9 D-streamed program about where students are sitting and where English teachers can intentionally move forward to make sure that students are successful on the OSSLT. It focuses on reading comprehension, fluency, and retell, and it gives a nice little idea of where students are across the system and across our schools. And then again, much like our numeracy support program, we also have additional funding for literacy prep support. Again, runs at what times work for students with that qualified English teacher, and again, focuses on the EQAO format. And the one thing that Erin Lee mentioned that I didn't put here, but I think is also important for folks to know, secondary schools are working very hard to make reading more accessible and desirable for secondary students. There seems to be a gap when kids loved reading when they were little, and it kind of seems to wane as they get older. And so a lot of us are working very hard to, yes, make sure texts are reflective of our students and what they want to read, but in ways that they can access that without always it being teacher prescribed. So in a lot of our library spaces, we have self-checkouts now. Students can come in and out. They can pick reading material that is of interest to them without that, conversation that sometimes happens in those spaces or the asking to go there. And so that's just another small way of continuing to get our learners to be reading and enjoying reading.
Any questions? Shut up. Hey, thank you. I have a few questions. It sounds like there's a lot going on at both levels, which is which is great. I'm a little curious though, because it sounds like there's like a lot of assessment happening driven around EQAO. In particular, when I'm hearing about this vault program, I don't know, it brings up some concerns for me, I guess, around whether we're spending our time in class teaching students how to answer questions on a test well, or whether we're actually teaching them important concepts in literacy and numeracy.
I can speak to it. We're not using vault right now for literacy. We are using it for numeracy. It's meant as an additional layer. It's certainly not replacing point of instruction or curriculum expectations. It is embedded, I would say, as a small part in each unit, where after students have acquired their base learning of curriculum, it gives them an opportunity to have assessments that are written by the teacher that correspond with their teaching style, but also maybe a smattering of option of some of those vault style questions that would mimic what it would look like on their EQAO. So it's meant to be in tandem. It's not one replacing the other.
But how often are students completing them during the term at elementary or secondary?
It's for elementary, it's my understanding.
Once per term?
No, like once, I believe,
Are you asking about the EQAO or just assessment in general?
the assessment
No,
involved, right?
The votes.
Yeah.
I don't,
So I can only speak, ours isn't a separate assessment. It's like a bank of questions. And so what a teacher may do is, let's say we're at the end of unit 3 on quadratics. They might go in and pull 1 or 2 sample style questions from the vault and include those as a part of what would be a final unit test. So as examples or questions that a student can see that are familiar to the EQAO format, that's different than what would be a traditional style question on that unit test. So it's not in addition to, and it's not a separate test, it's just supplementary for the secondary curriculum.
what about for the elementary?
First of all, it's only so not all elementary schools are actually engaging that, so it's an optional program. And my understanding at this time is that it is sort of one practice ahead of the actual. So it's not an ongoing situation. It is just a practice situation where they would have questions similar to what they would see on an actual EQAO assessment, but it's an opportunity for them to learn how to use like the computer and stuff like that, because in grade 3, like a lot of our students are now able and using computer technology a lot more. But again, we don't have necessarily full class sets of computers in classes in grades below grade 7. So this is an opportunity where we can get all of the kids prepared and ready in a format that helps support the test taking environment. Does that make sense? It's a practice of not replacing any of the teaching or the concepts or any of the best practices that are a regular way of teaching and learning.
I hear what you're saying. I feel like when we're using those strategies, though, it's taking away from other instructional time, right? If we're adding additional questions to assessments or creating additional assessments, it's taking away from time actually learning curriculum and just practicing how to answer questions well, so that it seems like we're scoring better on EQAO results. And I feel like personally, time would be better spent actually looking at what the child's needs are and how to support those specific needs rather than preparing them for how to answer EQAO questions, especially at the elementary level when the results of the EQAO do not impact them in any way.
Yes, Sean, just to add to that. So I think there's a lot more information that we could put on the table around vaults. There's been other boards that have been using it, showing really significant positive results in the math scores for those schools, those boards. Just a new pilot for us, but I think it would be beneficial because it's not just that. There's so many other layers of complexity to the work, which I think we're happy to bring back more information at a future meeting if you'd like, because I really think without seeing the whole picture, hard to determine, because some of that teaching is just good practice, right? And the work that's happening in those questions it's not about the question, it's sort of like everything that happens before the question is asked. And so that really is the deeper picture involved, but the results have been really positive in other systems. So happy to implement that if you'd like to.
I think, Sean, if I can just sort of summarize that, I think, and it is not an invalid concern, I think, just in terms of we want the numbers to look good. So, but we also want to make sure that we're spending the right time, because the best interest of the students is making sure that they actually get the curriculum and that they're learning, not just doing well on a test. As I think is sort of what your point is, that is your concern is all of these other strategies, is that taking away from this instructional time and just making sure that we're mindful of that you're absolutely 100% test anxiety is a real thing. And we want to do that, but it's not just for the QEO. We want to make sure that those strategies are being put in place so that kids are doing well in general, so we're properly assessing that you do get that they are. And then when their needs are identified, that we can then meet those needs through proper instruction and all the interventions and everything else that kind of needs to kind of go around at that point in time, rather than sort of focusing on the this is just, I think to me, this is highlighting all the things that are now more available. Yes, they can be used in conjunction with the EQAO, but I think that we want to make sure that we're not losing sight of everything else.
Yeah, we're not taking to the test, essentially.
So yeah, summarize a little bit. Shauna?
I think in a way, yes, I think what I'm hearing is that using this system program is showing positive results, which sounds like it's increasing EQAO scores, but in my experience, EQAO scores are not necessarily reflective of how well children are actually doing with curriculum. This is why many teachers unions are saying there's not a lot of benefit to doing the EQAO and pushing back against the provincial government for requiring this test to be done with. So then when I hear not only are we doing the EQAO, but we're spending time in class instead of supporting students is preparing questions so that students can do better on the test that doesn't necessarily reflect how well they're actually doing or what their actual needs are. It seems like a waste of time. And then we're having teachers use their time to analyze data from these questions, which aren't actually supporting students. So instead of doing additional work to support students, they're now having to analyze data to support board directives, which make the board look better, but it doesn't actually impact students in any meaningful way. That's my concern.
No, I was just gonna add that the when looking at EQAO questions, the ability of a student to engage in the learning that's within that particular question is based on so many layers of skills and critical skills that are essential for students. So I think there's some misconceptions that have been created about what these tools are used for, because they're definitely not prepared for that's not the intention of them at all. If that's how it's been perceived at the table, that's not the correct use of the tools. So I think what we're trying to do is represent the questions that are being asked are really solid, deep inquiry, critical thinking type questions that are helping support educators do the learning that is required for kids to be able to answer those questions. We're not concerned about using Vault or Maze or Cadence or any of those tools as a way to increase our scores. It's really about helping the kids develop the skills that they need, and the teachers now have a tool that allows them to ask those questions that are really deep for students to bring that forward. So we apologize if it makes it sound like we're using it to prepare for tests. That is definitely not the intent of those pieces at all. And I'd be happy to bring it forward so you can see actually how it's being used, because I think it's landing not how we intended. It's definitely not the purpose.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
I think to see some examples of how it's being used and implemented, and maybe
We haven't even had access to the vault yet. That will be coming, but we haven't at this point. So all of the assessment tools that we have been using are essentially out of this book, Assessing Reading Multiple Measures. And it has all of sort of the diagnostic tools that we're using in order to identify the areas within sort of the decision tree that we use to figure out where our students are at in some of those gaps that we're focusing on. So whether it be phonemic awareness, decoding, fluency, or comprehension, and that's sort of where we're getting our diagnostic assessments from. And then moving forward to that, in order to get those small group interventions, we use the next steps in literacy instruction, which is sort of a resource that kind of supports how we address sort of our tier 2 intervention systems in order to fill those gaps. So that's what we use in elementary.
Is that in conjunction with Acadians?
Yes. Yep. So we use Acadians, Maze, Dibbles. We use all of those assessments, the ORF, and everything is actually in that book. All of those assessments are in there. Yeah. selling screeners and all of that as well. Yeah, it's just like one-stop shop. Yeah.
Lyle, sorry, go ahead. Lyle, I think you had a question?
No, if there was a follow-up there, then please proceed.
No, I had a separate question, so go ahead, Lyle.
Oh, okay. Cheers. Thank you. Yeah, no, you'll have to forgive me. As a newbie, I may fill your quota for stupid questions asked today.
No, stupid question. No.
Cheers. So I think we know that like standardized testing, and particularly EQAO is a challenge in some cases to meaningfully inform pedagogy and how whether it provides actionable feedback. So I'm curious if the goal of the EQAO is to assess students' capacity at that level, and if it is it measured against end of term or end of year grades as another benchmark?
So
That's for you, Sharon.
I can speak to this from a secondary perspective, which is obviously different than our elementary, how we assess finals. So it was interesting as I was listening to some of your concerns. I think it's really important to understand that yes, the EQAO is something that the ministry has in place right now for us that is a requirement for our students. But at the secondary panel, our focus is on credit success and attainment, and really where our students are sitting and meeting provincial standards from the whole curriculum over the whole year. And so I think, Lyle, if what I'm understanding, at least from my perspective, is yes, we take the data from the EQAO, we see how our students have done as one measure. But I know in my seat as an administrator holding the numeracy portfolio, I absolutely am also looking at what the credit success looks like for learners in general across, for example, MTH1W. So where were they sitting in grade 8 with their achievement? Maybe was there modifications in place when they came in? What was their final mark? Are we level 2, level 3, level 4? And then how does that equate to how they did on the EQAO? That is absolutely a measure that we are using in terms of some of those pieces. But I know that may be a little bit easier to target because we have those report card pieces with it. Might look a little different in the elementary panel when we're considering credit attainment as a final completion before we move forward. But yes, if that's what you're asking, we look at those numbers side by side to determine where we go next.
In elementary, it's one measure as well. So we have a program called Power BI, and within that system, we're able to analyze various data pieces, which helps to create our plan moving forward. But we also have our fireside chats, which is also part of our observational data, along with our report card data, along with there's so many different data points that lead us to what our next moves will be.
But I think that's the challenge of the EQAO. It doesn't paint a full picture, right? It just paints a segment of a region. And a richer picture is to have all these other data points and metrics to really define how students are doing, both quantitatively and qualitatively. So I don't know what the fix is. I know I'm probably speaking out of turn, but like in the post-secondary level, we have assessment testing as well, and particularly for students with disabilities. And there's a disconnect, right? When students come into post-secondary and they do these assessment tests for placement or admission purposes, it doesn't many times match their performance in their academic program. And so it kind of sucks as a measure. We use it, we write reports on it, but it's not a good presentation of a student's success.
Okay,
thank you for your recording. It was great. There was a lot of information in there. My concern is that the audience that is listening to the report, there was a lot of acronyms in there. There was a lot of teacher talk in there. And I want to make sure that the general public, the parents, can understand some of the information that was shared. One of the things that I grasped from that there are so many different teaching methods that are being used. And one of the methods that are used once it's shown that the student needs support is explicit teaching. And when a layman person hears explicit teaching, it lines up more with what Sean was saying. And I'm hoping, Lauren, that when we do circle back, that we can have some specific examples of how we would use explicit teaching to address the EQAO for a student who's already shown that they needed support, and some of the other methods and methodologies that we're using. Because when I look up explicit teaching, I do, we do, you do, right? That could be teaching a concept, but that could be the answer is A, watch me press A. The answer is B, let's press B together. What do you think the answer is, right? And I want to ensure that the work you're doing is being well represented and understood by
Sherry.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated what you shared about student identity and making sure that they started with that. And I really appreciated that you started with that the environment is set up for students to be successful. So I think that is way more important than you can't have those successes in terms of what happens in the classroom unless those pieces are in place. So it's great to hear that. I did have a question about Maze and no, about the 10%, that the E3OB is 10%. Mark. So who marks the EQAO in that case? Do you have to wait for the ministry to give you the results, or is the how's that working?
Yeah, so it's, as you know, it's an online assessment now. And so actually the results are quite quick. And no, it is not the teachers who do it, it's the province, because it's a provincial assessment. So they get submitted through the database, and then usually within 24 to 48 hours, that populates back as a report with individual student achievement and how they did.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And let me just say, because I happened to be on a committee with EQAO, I've been with them for a few years, and so I have the opportunity to, with the team, to look over the assessment before it actually goes out. And they've done a really good job of being culturally relevant and responsive in terms of what they're including on EQAO. So I was hearing our friend on screen talking about some of the concerns, and that has been a concern for many years about students not being able to access it based on content, not just on decoding or understanding concepts and that kind of thing. And I think they've been doing a much better job of that and continue to do, and are really leaning in on a variety of different stakeholders within the system to feedback into it. So I just wanted to share that with the group, that some of the thinking that we may have had about EQAO and how it's presented for many of our learners is shifting, and quickly, and well, I would say, just in my humble opinion and my experience as an educator and seeing where it's going. So, but I am with Shauna in terms of how much time we're spending in the classroom focused on being successful in the test, because teacher and how we're assessing students so we know where they are, so that we know what to do for the test, concerns me, because it should be, let me find out this information so I know how to teach you and to meet your needs so that you have the skills. So regardless of what's on that test, you'll be successful at it. Now, does there need to be an opportunity to do some practice so they understand the formatting? Absolutely. That's 1 week before. But the other pieces should just be good practice. It should just be good teaching. It should be explicit for some students, and explicit based on what they need and what the curriculum is asking to do. That is what the test is for. And so we've been talking about it being for, so we know where students are. No, the test is to inform our practice. We want to see where kids are so we know what we need to do as an individual classroom teacher, as a division, as a school, and as a board on how to move our students forward. That is what the purpose of EQAO should be. It's not always, but that is what it should be. It should be to inform the educators in that building in terms of what do we need to do, edit, remove, start, continue to ensure that those marks, so that one assessment has some shift, just one thing.
I think so. You have one other question. Yeah, I've heard a lot about elementary
phonics instruction, which was great. I'm curious about how the DDSB is approaching math right now with in terms of sort of looking at kind of paring it down, because there's been a lot of focus on big ideas for quite a while in mathematics and similar to language, and we're seeing a turnaround with language to going back to basics and focusing on phonics again. I'm curious how the board is approaching that with math and what resources they're using and explicit instruction at the elementary level.
Well, essentially what we're doing right now is a lot of what we're doing is sort of talking through math. So math talks, we do some math journals, we do math thinking. So thinking through problems, using manipulatives. We have loose parts as well. So even loose parts that was once sort of supporting sort of our kindergarten division is now being expanded into our early primary as well. We're doing and incorporating some math games in order to solidify some skills. We also have different programs like Math Up and Education Perfect, which are digital programs that also target a lot of the different components of math. And it's a lot of hands-on learning, which I'm finding it's demonstrating different ways in which to understand math problems to begin with. And then you're scaffolding it in that regard where you get to demonstrate your learning. And sometimes you give that UDL perspective. So sometimes you're creating something, sometimes you're using your computer, depending on age and what their interest is in demonstrating what they know. And then moving forward into sort of some of the representational math, which is actually like numbers and equations and all of those things. So it's scaffolded in that way. Is that starting?
It does. Like, I'm familiar with Math Up, but to me that's more focusing on the big ideas. And when we're talking about like explicit instruction, I don't know that it's necessarily meeting that need. So I'd just be curious to see if there's an actual like resource for teachers that is being used to kind of walk them through explicit instruction for math students who are having a hard time with like learning basic math facts.
Right. And Shauna, that's a great question. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm happy to get it. Give you some specific examples. I mean, we have a general sense. I've not my portfolio, but certainly in the PD sessions we attend and the work that we're doing, we have a general sense. But I'm happy to go that and share some of it. Pieces. While you were talking, I was trying to pull up like because I think it's got some really deep pieces there about. And it was just came to board recently, so I just can't put my finger on it at the moment, but I'm happy to get it for you.
That'd be great.
It's a public document, so I just can't find it fast enough. So.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna say, yeah, so I think that you could share the link to the math strategy because I know it's available.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to find it. Yeah, as far as that is concerned. And you know, I agree with many of the points that Charmaine was talking about as far as, you know, what QAO is. However, the reality that we also deal with as a board is that we have a province minister that basically has been making comments about boards and how we have failed in EQAO. We have parents that listen to that. So they have their anxieties about EQAO and what it means as far as that. And so that's sort of part of to me, that's part of the teaching parents on what EQAO really is and understanding what it's used for, but also the thing that we still have the appraisal reports that's still used as well. And I have parents constantly phone me about the Fraser report, about EQAO. you know, as mentioned, before as well, is that it's a picture in time. Things can change. You can't compare one year to the next year because it's a different cohort. And it's different. It's totally different. So I'm glad at the beginning you talked about understanding the students. Like, just the question I really have is that how many times a year do you actually check in to see that you understand where the student is at that point in time, and really knowing them, because their situations can change, their environment can change, and strategies that have been used in the past may no longer not be able. So I'm just curious how often you check in to see if what you've created at the beginning to get to know your student is still valid.
So I know in elementary, I know that our IEP system, there is a whole section that has the interest section. So it's something that, I mean, at least throughout the year, for that component for students that have IEPs and identifications. But we are in elementary, I mean, that's part of the flow of the day, is to learn about what those changes look like and sound like, because that's where the biggest engagement pieces you will find when we are intentionally planning units and lessons to make that more successful. It also impacts more positive behaviors that we see too, because when our kids are more engaged, we're having less behaviors. They're wanting to come to school. So we're able to compare also with attendance data and everything like that. We're regularly talking and conversing with parents. We have a lot of really close parent partnerships within our schools. And that communication is a really strong way. And there's different ways that we can communicate. So through the remind us, through face-to-face when they're picking up their students and stuff like that, or their children. And I think that there's just various ways that we can connect that way. So we not only continuously learn about students through those discussions, but we also have intentional open dialogue that is intentional circles, like learning circles. And so it gives students the opportunity to share what their interests are. And so it kind of builds from there. So just in authentic conversations within the classrooms, that is then built to create intentional lessons that promote engagement within literacy and math. Actually, we leverage our community partners as well. So if we notice that that is something of interest and it connects to the curriculum, we have a lot of teachers that will go on student trips that address both curriculum and interest as well. So I think that in the elementary panel, I know that that is something that we continuously use. And we have one teacher that teaches the same group of kids throughout the entire school year. So it lends itself that way to better understand our students. So
Parking the conversation around EQAO and EOQ assessment over here, there's a lot of research that shows in the secondary panel that students who don't do well in grade 9 math or in math in general don't see the same success throughout high school. And so to answer your question, Donna, there is a huge focus about those checkpoints in math across that semester of how students are doing before we get to that final report card. And also to your point, in my school, I had 9 sections last semester running of MTH1W, and that wasn't including our MAT1L sections, or any of the ones that were with under our ISS classes. And each of those classes was performing at a different spot at midterm. And so that's where teachers have to be very cognizant of knowing their students and building those relationships with caregivers and kids to know that they might not be moving as fast in your class as they are in mine, because my data is showing different things. And that's the exact same conversation that we'd then be having about how we're preparing for something like the QAO. But the fundamental is making sure that students are achieving with confidence the math curriculum to be able to move forward to the next year. And so, you know, that's going to look different in different classrooms with different teachers every single semester. But there are regular checkpoints of how and when and why, and assessment for, as, and of learning. And that is where the expertise of the teachers at those homes and knowing your kiddos is where that comes in.
Thank you. It was a very, very fulsome discussion, much longer than anticipated. So I'm going to move on to item number 9, business horizon for the bids. So the first one is update on the special education parent caregiver symposium.
Just very quickly, we wanted to share, we sent out an initial registration. We had 974 registrations.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So great, we were fantastic. We were really excited about that. And so part of what happened next was you did an initial registration. Then once you registered, we sent you another link to pick your sessions. So we saw a little bit of a drop off in pick your sessions. So as of today, we closed registration today because we were sitting at just under 500. 499 registered attending. We actually had to go get 4 new additional rooms to add to the session so that we could accommodate other people. So February 10th, 6 to 8 p.m. over 20 community partners. We think it's going to be a fantastic evening. And what was really interesting that I wanted to share with the table here is the 2 most popular sessions that have the highest number of registrants are IPRC process and learning about IEPs, which is exactly the conversations that have been happening at the table here. So I thought that was really interesting to see that data, and what a beautiful way to make the conversations that have been happening here come alive in building capacity for families and caregivers to understand process and supports available here at the board. So I thought that was great. So I just wanted to share that.
Any questions? Donna?
Just comment. I know I asked this at the board as far as I was concerned, because I guess there are basically some concerns in that. That we know that there's no childcare being offered, but you know that it wasn't. But is it still, you know, the question was asked of that the wording and the as the thing was, you know, that it made it sound like children weren't allowed to come at all. And there are cases where parents may not be able to find a caregiver or whatever, they have to bring their child to the session. Then if it's okay to ensure that, you know, children are welcome. If, you know,
Yeah, and children are welcome. We were trying to use language that would help parents and caregivers know that the content that would be delivered was more appropriate for adults, may not be very engaging for children, but we certainly would never stop anybody from bringing a child along if they need to come and more along.
So I wonder if something to consider for next year might be if some of the sessions are offered virtually as well, so that families who have children who don't have babysitting or caregiving for them are able to attend and get the information as well. Because for families with young children, it's hard to come out. So even if it's like the content isn't appropriate, but kids are welcome, some families, there's a barrier there. So families with young children, families with kids who have high support needs, because you're going to then not just have to hire a babysitter, but you're hiring a respite worker. It's very expensive, difficult to do, difficult to schedule. So I think if we look at addressing that for next year, that would kind of remove that barrier for many families and make it much more accessible. Thank you. It's great. Thank
Any other comments, Mr. Lyle? Did you have anything?
No, I was just nodding along, agreeing that
Okay.
hybrid or
Okay, perfect.
hybrid or high flex would be great options to support family needs.
Okay, then second item, Mrs. Rising for the minutes is the draft letter talking about our sternly worded letter to the Minister of Education about the proposal to replace trustees with our provincially appointed supervisors. Has everybody had a chance to read, provide input, questions, things, comments? Jermaine,
that letter has not been sent.
has not been sent.
Okay. Fantastic. I was in a meeting for all the SEAC representatives from Ontario Parents Representing Fair Children, who I represent, and they are very interested in having and joining in this. The other boards that they represent are interested in them bringing it forward to their SEAC boards to write something similar or to join with us in that. So I just wanted to bring that forward if that's an opportunity to share that letter once completed and ready to send.
We usually by default CC every CF in Ontario, so they would always get a copy.
Okay.
So then that's why we get a lot of we are writing in, in support of the letter from the DCDC, or, York Region, et cetera, et cetera. We've done that multiple times to say in support of, so yes, they will.
Okay, fantastic. I'll just let them know it's on its way.
Yes. Yeah. So you get it finished. The one thing I did kind of want, does anybody else have any other comments or questions? I think one of the things that might be a good item to add in here as well, it just because of the, I'm going to say the politics involved with the whole conversation, is saying the trustees are non-partisan. So the trustees serve as a non-partisan direct voice of families and students. Just adding that and saying they are not politically motivated. This is about this community, about this group of students. So it's not about who's in power, who's not in power. It's about the kids and families. So things that we're okay with. And then add of that. Did anybody see any typos or ground?
I just saw in the last paragraph on the first page there, the first sentence, I feel like our the point gets lost a little bit, just with the phrasing. Furthermore, setting up parent student support offices to be staffed by current board staff is a great point of contact. That's what's standing out at me. I would change it to say, while a great point of contact. It's just going to emphasize the second half of the sentence a little bit stronger, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I was trying to read and quite fast in that sentence there. So that's exactly. Any other or adds? Thoughts?
Just the comment, not on the letter, because I'm staying out of the letter, but there was an article just to follow. A little bit of conflict of interest, I think. Just to follow up, but David Lefosky actually wrote, it was an article that wrote from his association, and I think I'll send it along as well. It was a really, really well written article. Yeah, I think it was in Hamilton, this story for it, but just share it with.
He's TDSB. He's SEAC and TDSB.
Yeah, he's SEAC. Yeah, TDSB. But it's well. So I think that should go with that forward it on.
So I'm just gonna add, it was gonna say for association reports, but it's right on the topic. Autism Ontario was included on TPO's rundown. The topic was how special education students are falling through the cracks with Ontario Bill 33 and how parents are carrying the load for fighting for their children. It's going to be aired, it's actually just started, it's aired tonight at 8 p.m. And as of tomorrow, it will be on TPO's YouTube and website for free.
Can you say that title again?
I'm just saying.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you.
It was so if there's anything else, I think we just want to make those couple of changes, and I think I'm much ready to send this one out. Okay, I'll do that on, you said, write them down, get that. You've got those, I think Kaziba's got the draft, of it, or do you have it? That's the one, okay. All right, should make those changes and then, we can send that up to the motion with the big bill. We don't need to motion the changes. Excellent. I like those measures. All right, moving on to number 10, association reports. Thank you, Senator Knight. Any other, do we have any other association reports? No, okay. Moving on to correspondence, which I don't think we have. Excellent. Community concerns. We have a large number of community discussions. So we have one we actually did talk about, I think, yeah, already, which was the we had the wording about the children who are not expected conversation. So I think that talked about that already. There was two folks that had brought in some emails from parents about placement of AAC devices. Multiple points of being brought up, saying what's the process around updating or replacing the equipment, what training is provided to caregivers and students to ensure smooth transition, and how do caregivers report issues? What's the protocol around the use of data logging on these devices, and why? What procedures can we put in place to keep caregivers to ensure to ensure that they receive regular communication on how their child's doing with the devices? Long wait times for DDSB and community clinicians is a barrier to timely access. I think we've talked about that. Access to functional backend communication when device is unsafe, unavailable, not functioning, etc. Unclear variable escalation timelines and interim support when the technology fails, and lack of clear assessment accommodations for tools such as a cadence. Lauren, if you have a bunch of stuff.
I do. Happy to speak to those. Just to provide some context, AAC device, so an augmentative and alternative communication device. In the DDSB, it's often an iPad that we would put software on, such as the names of the software, LAMP, TV Snap, Proloquo to go, and Touch Chat. We also have some mid-tech devices, things like quick talkers or step by step, and they're devices that you can record voice onto that kids can use, and it would it's a recordable output device. But generally speaking, when we're talking AAC, we're likely talking an iPad with some software on it. So in DDSB, if we have a device in a classroom, it can be either a home device that might have been accessed by the family through related AP providers, that might be through, for example, or it's a SEAC device funded by the ministry. So a SEAC device is a special equipment amount and would be funded through ministry for the student for use. So when we're talking about updating or replacing a SEAC device at school, what we do is if there's something that happens to the device, we put in a health ticket. So the school would put in a health ticket, and that goes into board office, indicates the concern with the device. We mark those urgent. That is the child's form of communication. So that needs to be replaced as quickly as possible. If the device is working but not, if there's some pieces like it's malfunctioning or things are happening or it's not working all the time, we keep that device with the student. We don't take it while keep it with the student until we can bring the device. In my experience, it's about 5 working business days from when we can put in the health ticket to when we can have a new device at the school. When it gets replaced, a technician comes to the school, they sync the 2 devices together. School is responsible for checking the settings on the device. And best practice would be to check with the parents to make sure that the settings on the device are the same as they were previously, so that the child, there's no interruption in service to the student. So that would be the general process. The next question I think I had was, what does the training look like for when a student does get a new device? So if we have a device, a DDSB SEAC device that comes into a school, generally we have teams at the school do a trial, and then there's training that happens before the trial. So teacher has to know how to use it. They have to model that, working with the student within the classroom. We generally start with a half day of training for staff, that are new to an AC device, and we're able to train both educators and EAs that work with the device in the classroom setting. Training for students and parents. So if your device comes through, let's say, Holland Bloorview, I think I said Grandview before, but if it comes through Holland Bloorview, they offer training for parents and students right in the home. So they'll come with you to the home and provide that. We obviously can't go into the home. So if it's a DDSB device, we do invite parents can come into the school, and we can do some training for parents and students right in the school setting. There are videos that also support additional learning for educators. So after the trainer leaves, there may be questions for the questions that you have. So there's videos that also support. And then we provide ongoing in-class support to our SLP department, our speech and language department. And we actually have here in DDSB an AAC lead. So her name is Amanda Dolstra. And I think Amanda came last year to see you. She did a presentation. I know there was a presentation in October of 2024, which if you're interested, you can access the recording. Amanda came and did a presentation. And then there was also an impact update on AAC devices that was shared last year, and it's volume 10. It's on the website if you'd like further information about that. So Amanda, I know what she does is whenever we have a student that moves into a new class, there's training available for the new teacher that's receiving the device and students to make sure that this transition is smooth. And we also make sure, as I said, that classroom supports and staff, we have these checklists that are actually like whether to support the transition, to make sure nothing's missed in the training and the transfer of the device. We have checklists that we use at the end of the year and at the beginning of the year to make sure that's those pieces are covered for the student. So we also offer board-wide professional development for educators. So on all PA days, we have some of our SLPs running AAC professional development. And then at the request, anytime if the school has a request for training, the Amanda can come in with the school. Data logging. So data logging is a setting on an AAC device. So imagine if you have a student has the device, every time if data logging is on, every time the student presses something on the screen, it records, it keeps a log of every time there's a touch. So the data logs from a LAMP device, for example, they're generally intended to be used to gather data to assist clinicians when they're developing programming or new language for a student. It gives them a sense of how it's being used. Is the student accessing, what is the language that students accessing? What are they not accessing? So they use that to sort of fine-tune programming for the student. But what's really important about a log is it's a one-sided conversation. So if you're looking at a data log from an AAC device, what you're looking at is just what the student has pressed. What you can't see is the other side of that conversation. So how was the teacher moderating? What was the response from the teacher? Were they talking to another classmate? So you get to sort of on one side. So what's really important about when you're looking at data logs is that you have an opportunity to triangulate data and you have a sense to talk about when I say triangulate data, I mean, what were the conversations happening in the space at that time? What was the teacher observing at that time? And so really having a wholesome picture really helps the clinician make informed decisions about the language. So when we talk about data logging, we want to make sure it's there's context behind the communication, if that makes sense. So when we provide a SEA device to a student, so one that comes from the DDSB, it's live SEA funding given to the student, we don't automatically turn data logging on. We turn data logging on should there be need for data collection. So rather than just having it collecting everything that the student's pressing, if there's a time where in collaboration with school team and SLP, and they're looking maybe to implement some new communication on the device, and then we'll use that data that we collect to inform next steps. We are happy to share that data with families if they'd like a copy of that data. Obviously, they have access to that, so at any time. But once we're done with that data collection, we would typically turn it back off. So the reason is why do we not leave it on? Generally, we don't turn it on at all times because it can be intrusive to that individual. So if you and I are wanting a private conversation, I can whisper to Lisa or I can step out in the hall. But if you're recording everything that's said for a student at all times, it's essentially recording private conversations they might be having with their peers at recess time, or it's reporting conversations that maybe they don't want everyone to see. We all know that kids have other conversations that may not, they don't want their parents or caregivers to maybe hear. So we don't leave it on for at all times. And so the other thing is that if you're reporting at all times, also clinicians could have access to that data, families could have access to that data, and teachers could have access. So we don't keep it on at all times. What's really important is that when we do data logging, that we align those practices with informed consent procedures. So if you think about informed consent, thinking about things like what type, we have to be clear on what type of information we're looking for. What setting is the data being collected in? What are the expectations of the individual during the time of data logging? So you might want to indicate the student just need you to communicate normally, don't do anything different than normally would do. We have to also indicate how we're going to maintain confidentiality of the data that we're collecting, how we're going to secure that data, and any other risks obviously associated with data logging. And there also has to be within that informed consent, the option of the person being able to indicate how they can terminate their participation in the data collection, right? So those are all the informed consent pieces. For obvious reasons, that's why we're not always keeping it on, but happy to have it on when the need arises and happy to share that with families as needed. There was a question around how can we ensure that caregiver receives regular communication. I read that a little bit differently. So the way I read it is if I'm a non-speaking student, I use an AAC device to communicate. My parents don't maybe know how my day went at school when I get home, right? Because they might not be able to tell them all the things that happened. So that I saw it as how can we create structures within the school so that parents can get that information. And I think it really is different depending on different classrooms and how teachers want to approach that and how families want to approach that. So some of the things that I have seen that have worked really well in situations where there was an AAC device was home communication log that shares something I learned today, a social success that I had. This is just speaking of one particular example, a social success that I had today because that was a goal we were working on with family, and a challenge that I had. So the parent was getting those pieces of information. It could speak to the student about those pieces. I've seen Google form used where there was a back and forth communication with the family through just a Google form that teacher typed on, parent typed on, and it just kind of went back and forth. So that was another one that I've seen as well. But I think really it's professional judgment of the teacher on how they want to communicate that data to families. So I would encourage anybody who is looking for that information from school to have a sit down with the educators and the team at the school to determine what's the best, what would best meet the needs for the teacher and what best meets the needs for the family and what is manageable for both, right? Because it can be a lot if you're filling out those pieces every day, and sometimes you might not have time. So if you miss a day, okay. So just working out some expectations around that communication. And there was another question around wait time. So referral, and so I can't necessarily speak to the wait times through on your review, but I can speak to the wait times through DDSB. So from generally speaking, and things change depending on caseload. So our individual speech language pathologists, let's say they have, they support a group of schools. And so depending on their individual caseload, we might have a little bit of difference from when referral goes in to when they see a student, but generally speaking, it's around 2 weeks. Also depends on what the referral is for. So if it's pretty simple referral, it may be a little bit faster. But if you know it's a complicated referral, that might take more time. That might take a little bit more time to access. So we have about a 2 week. It can be about 2 weeks to a month, depending on, as I said, what type of referral and caseload. So just, and I'm sorry, I know there's a lot here and I'm giving you so much information, but I want to make sure I give you some pieces. So what would happen if you were looking, let's say, for a referral for an AAC device, SC device for school? The SLP would receive the referral, and the first piece of the process is to have a consent call. So they reach out to the parent, have a discussion about what the services are that are needed, what the goals might be, gather consent from the family. They then do a classroom visit to really get a sense of what is the need of the student, what does it look like right now, what's happening in the classroom. If based on those conversations and they think that, and those observations, they think a student might require an AC device, then we do a dynamic assessment. So SLP will come in, gather some assessment data around what it is that that student needs. If based on that assessment, we want to move forward with, and the student is interested and engaged in that device, then, and we have a parent that's also interested, we then begin a trial. So we have trial devices that we can provide to the student. They use the trial device within the classroom. So that's a collaboration between staff and caregiver. And then there's do some training, obviously, to make sure that that's used in the classroom for both student and staff. And then after that trial, then we make a decision with the caregiver and staff around whether it's appropriate to move forward with the device. And if it is, then we order the SEAC device. SEAC device shouldn't be more than a month from the time we agree that is the correct approach for the student. Should be more than about a month to put it in place. It is a lengthy process, but I think it's important that we really follow all those steps, because essentially we're choosing a method of communication potentially for a lifetime for that student. So it's not a decision that we want to make lightly. So it really is based on careful data collection and working collaboratively with the family. Okay, I think there was a backup. So question around backup for the devices. So there are things that happen to devices. Obviously, it's a school and their iPads and they can get damaged. So we do have staff are trained how to do backup files. And so if a device malfunctions, we do have a backup file that will be, as I said, transferred back onto the new device. But best practice is we encourage all schools to have paper copies of the data that's on the live device, so that you can print out PDFs of the language that, so the student wouldn't be able to use the iPad, but they could use something like this where they can still access the language. It's just not their iPad. So this can be what we have is we have learner kits here at the board office. So this is a sample of a learner kit that a school could borrow if they needed to, which would have some backup language, and they would also be able to access their backup language on their student's device at their school through printing off the PDFs. And so you can create visuals, they can laminate those, you can carry rings of pictures around with the teacher. So there's ways that we can use these until the new device is able to be backed up or the new device arrives. And there's posters that can be put up. So I'm sitting in front of it, but large posters that can be put up in classroom, library, gym, things like that to support. So that's what we do in terms of a backup the device. And then there was a question around assessment accommodations, and it was specifically related to a student who has is a complex communicator, has an AC device, and things like Acadience. So Acadience is a ministry mandated provincial assessment that we are asked to do in year 2 of kindergarten. So year 2, grade 1 and grade 2. And it is a timed test. Like there's very particular expectations that have to be met in order to do the Acadience test. So student sits down, there's a timer starts and whatnot. So we recognize that the Acadience test is not for all. And obviously every student that sits down for that assessment has different strengths and needs and might require accommodations. So what is interesting about the Acadience is that accommodations can be used for Acadience, but they're only used for students where the conditions would not produce an accurate result. So what would happen is if you use an accommodation, there's approved accommodations and non-approved accommodations. So I can give you some examples of approved accommodations. So it might be that larger print, there might be color overlays, there might be underlines. Those are all things that the ministry says are approved accommodations. But removing the timing of the test or reading things out to the student, those would not be approved accommodations. So someone who has an AC device may not be able, clearly is not going to be able to engage in the test in the same way. It doesn't mean we can't do the assessment. The Acadience assessment is only one piece of the puzzle. It's one picture of the student's ability, and as we said, used to drive instruction for the student. So you can still do the Acadience assessment, just don't time it, right? Or maybe the student's responding on their device, but what a teacher is doing with that data is collecting information about the student that would be valuable for their practice and moving forward, but we can't submit it to the ministry. We can't submit it to the ministry because we've changed the way that we've delivered the assessment. Doesn't mean we can't do it though. So we are still, generally speaking, do we have to make the student do it? We should invite the student to sit down. If they want to do the assessment, yes. If the student's not willing to do the assessment, we're not forcing them to do the assessment, right? So there are layers that we can put in place for a student and things that we can't do. But again, it doesn't affect it's not attached to report card, right? It's just an assessment for a teacher to get diagnostic data around how to support that student. So you can still get that from the assessment. And I think that is all questions we had around case. I think them all.
Well,
Sorry.
that's fine.
I hope I
It's
just
a lot of questions and points to that one.
okay. Yes.
Just want to clarify, like, maybe those were just two examples of like a C device and then through Hollywood, there's lots of other ways that they can access
Yes.
those devices.
Right. Yes. So those are the two that we see most often, but there are, yes, families can access money in other ways to receive a device. Absolutely.
Or purchase.
Purchase.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I have a whole list of questions, so if somebody else wants to project.
We'll go with Lyle.
Okay.
So forgive me, I apologize, I'm jumping the queue. I heard you talk about informed consent. That was really encouraging to hear. Is that an opt-in process where individuals are informed and then they're opting in, or is it controlled by the board, turned on and off as needed? And then the second question, if I can have a follow-up quickly, is it sounds like there's good measures to gauge the appropriateness of the AT and to support adoption and uptake. And I'm curious about how abandonment is measured. So when it's prescribed or ascribed, is there measures to determine it's effective and it's still working, or is it not measured once it's distributed?
Okay, so first question, in terms of consent is sought if data is being collected. So if we are in a situation, there's two consent pieces there. There's a consent prior to even the consent for first referral and access to a device. And then if data is being collected, then consent around how that data, in terms of the pieces that I listed, how we'll be using that data, what the intent of the collection is, how we're going to secure that data. So and consent sought there. And then your second question, which is whether or not we engage continued use of the device. So it is an ongoing process. So Amanda Dolstra is her role as she's a speech language pathologist, but she is our AAC lead. So she is comes alongside school teams. So if we start to see a student who's not engaging with the device, like I give you a very specific example of a device. I went into a school the other day, student was not engaging with the device anymore. Modeling is happening, but students not engaging, not using and not comfortable with the device. So she's coming back in alongside the school team to do some additional planning and some additional programming to start, what is it that we need to change within the student's programming to then prompt back to the device. Where are the reinforcers? How is that being modeled? So there's lots of layers of support that continue once the device is in place.
Sure.
Okay. I'm just wondering if I know you talked a little bit about the timelines involved. I'm just wondering if you can verify the minimum standards that apply in every case, regardless of school or staff, when an AAC device is unavailable or unsafe.
That's right.
What is the minimum standard of process to, or like the minimum standard of what do we do when an AAC device is unavailable?
Minimum standard. So we do everything we can to replace it as quickly as possible. So the process that I explained would be the minimum standard.
Is it like a documented standard though? This is the timeline for.
No, because you can't guarantee a timeline, right? Like what you can do is, so from when the health ticket goes in, what I can see is that Sandra upstairs processes any requests, if there's an IT request for a new C device because one's been damaged, she assists us with marking that as urgent, and she follows up regularly to make sure it gets replaced quickly. But you have to have a device to replace a device. So if we have difficulty accessing or if we're not are not able to procure a device, then we have an issue. But generally speaking, we try to make sure it's within about 5 days. I've only seen 2 in my time, but both of them were about 5 business days to replace. And again, there should be, if in both the circumstances that I had, the device was still working, but not as well as it had been previously. So the student was still able to use it, but there should be a backup at the school. If the student can't access the device, there needs to be a backup. Is there form of communication? It should be replaced.
So that's what I'm asking you about a minimum standard. Like, is there a process or procedure written down for this is the minimum standard?
No, there isn't a written process.
Okay. My next question is, can you clarify this? So I know you talked a lot about like an itinerant or somebody is coming in and supporting the training when a student is acquiring a device. Like, what is the specific training? Is there a documented procedure for this is the specific training that every single teacher is going to get when a child is either coming into a program with an AAC device or is getting a new AAC device? What is the training that is happening before the child is transitioning into the program or before the child is accessing the device if this is a new device?
So what I can tell you is that in the what we've got here in CHIP, so there is a documented process for an AAC being put in place into a classroom. So before, what it says here is before they leave the classroom and the AAC device is there, there's a collaboration between staff, caregivers, and they set the functional trial goals. So those are in collaboration together. Then there's, it says lightly customize the trial AAC for the specific student. So what are the needs? So it would be individual to every single student. So I don't think you could say there'd be specific training for, because each student would have to require a different process. What does that child need? Their training might look different than what this child needs or this family needs. So it talks about AAC basics and orientation to the system is their initial training, modeling the strategies for the use of the device, how to target specific goals on a device. They provide a goal tracking sheet for the school team. And then before they leave, they schedule part 2 of the training, which is then in classical GM modeling for visits. And then within the trial, it says revisiting the class regularly for coaching and check-ins to monitor progress. So the goals that we set within that context with that family and the SLP would be what the modeling the training would look like and then regular check-ins.
And what about for students who already have a device? So it's not a new SEAC lane. Let's say they're transitioning into kindergarten with an AAC device. What does that training look like? Or if they're coming from another school board or from another school?
Yeah, I don't think it would change because the goals set, if whatever those goals are that you set would be, that would drive your training, right? So if you have a student that's never used a device before, ever, so brand new SEAC device in the classroom, that looks fun. The training would look very different than the student who's got an AAC device at home and then comes to school. And so the home device is synced with the school device. So the student's probably pretty efficient in the use, but now we have staff that aren't so proficient. So then the goals of that particular team would look different than the other students that are brand new device. So I think it's really, the key is that the goal setting is really the key that drives the work.
Is there a process in place for making sure that the teachers get this training when these transitions happen?
Yes. It's part of this. Yes.
So when a child transfers from another school and they're coming with an AAC device, or if they're entering kindergarten, the principal is flagging this process through the inclusive education department?
Yes.
Thank you. So is there worldwide guidance on where these supports must be available? So for example, in the gym or in indoor spaces, and how staff are expected to use them when a device can't be accessed?
Like the backup pieces. Yeah, and there's situations where, let's say, a student likely doesn't want the device or may not be as inclined to use the device, and they want this gym. They want to run around in gym. They don't want to be having to carry the device around or have it. So we have situations where we put posters in the gym so that they can access the poster. Often, if there's an educational, like an educational assistant or support staff with the student, they'll have a ring with the pictures that the student can access easily. Again, can't force the student to use this form of communication. Like you can't say you must put that down. You're going to use this poster. What we do is we have the tools available. We encourage the use of the tools, but the student really drives how they want to communicate in those particular places. But the resources should be available to the student so that they can access them. And again, the student, we often see that they have many forms of communication. It's not just the AAC or just the symbols. It can be gestures. They have lots of ways to communicate. They can, point or there's different ways to engage with their staff that might not necessarily they might not want to give you access. So we try to give the student whatever option they're most comfortable with, but make them available to the student.
Thank you. What I'm asking though is if there's board-wide guidance on it.
No, because it would be individual to each student. So it has to be based on what does the student need. So if a student doesn't necessarily, if they don't require, so there are some kids who use a device for, let's say, clarification, but actually are able to communicate in other ways. So they do have some verbal communication. If it's a need to have the symbols, we would put the symbols in place, but it really has to be driven by the need of the student, right? And if the student needs symbols in the gym, we'll put them in the gym, right? But it has to be a collaboration and a conversation with families. There isn't, you must have these in this space. It would be based on the need of the particular student.
Is it harmful to have them in this space?
And these often are really good for lots of kids, not just individual students.
So that may be something the board could look at as like a UDL strategy, where all gyms could just have communication boards available for any student that might need them. For libraries. Or offices. That's what I mean by just like board-wide guidance is like a basic standard for this is what we expect to support these types of language learners.
It's more like normalizing it. It's just everywhere, so therefore it's not an issue.
Yeah.
Like it's not
It's
that
not,
way.
it's not saying that's different, but because it's always ubiquitous, it's just always there. Whether anybody chooses to use it or not is up to the individual student. So that's not a big deal anymore.
Or they're generally, so you would design one for a particular student. So there are different samples here because one student's language might look different than another. Like some are more complex than others. So it's hard to make one poster that serves all, but you could have, like based on what you're saying, you could have something like this might look like one student's AAC device. This might be what you see on their home screen. They could look very different than other students, right? So it's hard to make one poster that serves all. But what you are saying is we could do some general high frequency things you might need to access in those spaces. Like I'm just saying washroom, too loud, like things that
these exist in like public parks and stuff. So it's definitely something that exists in the world.
Yeah.
It's not going to be complex communication, but it's going to get basic.
I like that idea.
My next question is just given the wait times that families are reporting for access to speech language services right now, how does the board ensure students with unreliable access to speech are supported while waiting for clinical recommendations or SEAC approvals?
So we can do a referral to our SLP to come in to access programs, educational programming supports for students. That's what we can do. We can do a referral while they wait. SLP can come in. If we need assessment, we can do some assessment with the student. SLPs can come alongside the program with staff, put supports in place in the classroom. That's exactly the role. So that's, and wait lists here are not long to have them come in and support the classroom.
The next question. For students whose speech is inconsistent or unavailable during stress or dysregulation, what interim communication supports are expected before the formal recommendations are completed?
Can you explain what
So
you mean?
once we've identified that a child has inconsistent speech that's available to them, so kids whose language kind of shuts down when they're stressed out or anxious, while they're waiting for the referral to the SLP to go through what supports are expected to be in place to support them.
So hard to answer without knowing exactly what the needs of the student are. But I think if you know your student well, like to me, that if that's the situation that a student, a teacher, student, family is in, there needs to be a conversation, sit down with family to determine what are the needs of the student. Like, do we create a plan of an escalation response for a student? So, or a safety plan. So, a student, if these are the signs of escalation, this can be the response. So it just depends on what it is that's causing these escalations. Likely, to me, I would need to know everything I can about the student to determine how, first of all, alleviate the whatever it is, what is the antecedent to the upset, and then plan forward from there. So it really is based on a planning process with the team to determine what the student needs. Hard for me to say specifically what it would look like because I don't know what it needs the student. It would be very individual to that particular student.
Is there written guidance for how Acadians should be administered and documented for non-speaking AAC users, and where that accommodation is reported in Power School?
That's a good question. So does the ministry provide us a particular language? No. And so if the student requires, like if you require an accommodation outside of the test, then you can't do the case in the way that it was designed to do, but you can still record the data. So I think it depends on what you're collecting the data for. But there isn't anything like other than what we have from the ministry around approved and non-approved accommodations. That would be the only indication that we would have in terms of how we can approach that test, but we don't record anything in particular in Power School.
I think a concern that was brought up, which I think is a valid concern, is the way Acadians is designed and delivered isn't necessarily suitable for all students. And just because a student might be compliant with participating in Acadians doesn't mean that participating in that activity is not causing them harm in some way. If you're being forced to participate in a test that isn't designed for how you can communicate, or the skills that you can show, that's going to have a negative impact on your mental health and your self-esteem. And young children and even older children who might be people pleasers might do it to be a good child, the whole time feeling terrible about themselves that they're failing a test, that they're feeling forced to complete. So
we never force a student to complete the test. So we do not.
Because of the power dynamic between adults and teachers and children, forced means different things. So it's not holding them down in a chair and forcing them. It's they know they can't do it, and they're feeling terrible about themselves, and they're doing it anyways because they want to be good and they want to please, but it's harming them.
Yeah, and we've had scenarios where the student says, "I don't want to do it." We don't make them do it. Like we're not. If the student it says if they're not, they don't want to engage in the test. Don't keep prompting. We'll keep pushing. If we know that the student's not able to engage in that test, the test is yes, the results go to ministry, but it does not apply to all students. It's not appropriate for all students. And so if a student does not want to engage in that test, there won't be anybody forcing the child to engage in that test. Now we do have alternate options that would be accessible with an AAC device to gather similar type of data that you get on the Acadians test. Just doesn't go back to the ministry, but we do have something that school teams can use to gather the same kind of data. And so that drives the programming for student. Again, remember Acadians is to drive programming. It's yes, it goes to the ministry, but it really is to inform the teacher, what do we do next for this particular student? it gives us really valuable information. You can get that information other ways from kids. You don't, it's not the only way to gather that data. And so I don't force kids to complete the test. We offer that to allow them to, but if they're not going to engage in the test, we don't force.
So I think what I'm looking for is like not necessarily from the ministry, but from the school board written guidance for whether this test needs to be administered to all children, how it should be administered to different types of children, and whether it's appropriate to even offer it to certain children. Because individual schools can interpret things differently and make their own choices. So just looking for like a systems level guidance on administering this test to special education students.
And I think we are obligated to follow ministry expectations, but we do so in a way that's acknowledging the child's need, dignity of the child. So nothing in writing, but need to be responsive to that individual student. But there is an obligation for ministry to follow their guidelines, right, on the administration of the test. But we do so in a way that students say they won't do that, we're not forcing them to do that.
So the ministry is forcing all children to participate in this?
No, because you don't have to complete the test, right? You don't have to submit results for certain students.
So then why don't we have written guidance on it?
The ministry is clear. I think they provide the guidance in terms of expectation. We take that guidance and we humanize it for our kids.
Maybe that's something we can table as a group in terms of reaching out to the ministry and letting them know what our concerns around that testing is, and some of the things that you're addressing and bringing forward. I think you know what I'm hearing is that as a board, we can't really, like, there's only so much we can do because it is a ministry mandated piece, right? Like similar to, in a way, not the same, obviously, but EQAO, right? They have their structures and how it's supposed to be administered. Yes, there's wiggle rooms for students who may not be able to or whatnot. So I think your concerns are completely valid, and they need to be addressed, but maybe this is at the table. Maybe it's not at a board level that as a SEAC, if we choose to, that we need to address it. We need to bring those forward to the ministry so they're aware, because I like to be like, I don't know, but to me, I think just getting at past practice, they probably aren't even thinking about students like that who are going to be taking the test. They're thinking to the middle. They're thinking at level 3 student, right? So, and when they buy these programs, because that's what they did, when they buy these assessments from wherever, whatever country, whatever organization, they're not thinking through all of those pieces. So I think we need to bring it forward, but it's to that we need to bring it forward. That's just my opinion.
Cynthia, did you have a question?
Could you finish on it?
For now, yeah, go.
Okay, we'll skip back around to you. Thank you, because I'm over time.
Yes, no, that's.
I don't want this to feel like an attack, but I am going to represent families who have had problems accessing the AACs, especially when there's a difference of opinion on the needs of the child, they use it as well. So I want to talk a little bit about how families access the AAC when the school board speech and language pathologist is saying that the child is not ready for that, but it's in use with the private speech and language pathologist. The parent has made a formal request, the parent is advocating. Some of the things that have been reported back to me. I do want to say that there's probably so many successful opportunities, but right now I'm just representing my family. Right? Some of the things that the families have been said to the families why it's not appropriate at this time to get a digital device is the child is too young, quote unquote, meaning that when they get to above grade 3, then it will be considered, and a lot of the times they talk about budget when they say the child is too young and not about the child's needs for access. The not recommended by the board SLP, but is in use at home with the private SLP. And sometimes the parents have reported that the principals just denied it. Just And you must know that when the families contact me, they don't call to celebrate their successes with me. The only time they contact me is when there's a problem. And so I may hear of the 3, 4, 5 problems with the AAC devices. Usually they don't come just because of the AAC. It's a larger problem, mostly with relationships, communication, follow through. But I want to know more about how the parent advocates those needs when they're being denied for whatever reason.
Yeah,
they decide.
that's unfortunate. So I think that the key, if the parents need to have an avenue to advocate, our system needs, if there's concerns that are not being addressed at the school level, like to me, if a student's using the AC device at home, part of our process is if it's their form of communication, if it's actively being used at home, why can't it be used at school? Right now, I'm not sure if you're talking about funding both a home device and a SEAC device, because then you're double dipping potentially, right? In terms of, I know that, is it appropriate to have funded device at home and a funded device at school? I don't know if that's the issue, like I'm not sure what the issue is there.
The family that was accessing private SLP bought the device out of pocket, right? So there was no funding on that side. When the private SLP made a recommendation, but this device get used at school and they can start with this, the school SLP deemed it unnecessary and that the child wasn't ready for that. But it's actively being used at home. So my concern isn't to try to pick apart the reasonings that they were told.
Yeah.
Because by the time they get to me, they've knocked on a lot of doors, right? They have tried to advocate for themselves at school. They've tried to talk to their special education resource teacher. They've probably called a couple of the agencies around the table already. And then one day they call somebody who says, you know what, I can put you in touch with SensorNet. And usually it's combined with other things that they need support with in accessing at school. So it's not just that they're talking about the AAC, they're also talking about the IEP not being applied. So oftentimes these parents have been the squeaky wheel everywhere. And sometimes it's personalities that are now saying no, but that's not my concern.
Yeah.
My concern is what are our formal steps for our families when they're advocating for supports and being denied at a school board, specifically A's.
Yeah, so highly recommend that families reach out to our system leads. That's the goal of the system leads. They're a connection point between school or parent. That's what Joe and Nancy and Connor do. So if a parent is struggling to navigate the school level, please encourage them to reach out to our system leads, because then they become the conduit back to the school to gather more information, to figure out the why, what is our next steps, how can we collaborate together. So if you could encourage them to do that, that would be appreciated.
Okay, but I just want to just like correction, they're not having problems navigating the school or access, they're being denied, which is different than knowing who to ask, what to ask, and getting, I don't know, right? I just the tiny caveat, right? Yeah. So I'll just send them your way. Usually what happens is I have to take time off work, go into the school, meet with the school officials. Usually about my second meeting at the school board, they ask for one of the system leads to come, and then we get the ball rolling. But I have to play nice because I'm just an outside volunteer advocate. And before I even offer a visit in school, I have sent my families back with steps to advocate. Can you try this? We do role playing, we do scripting, and access changes from school to school and stream. So I just this is why I appreciated a lot of Shauna's questions when it came to the AAC about formalizing processes, so that not only do my parents have something to bring and say, see, right, but also for Because I don't want to say the administrators are just saying that's a main parent and we don't want to do it. I want to say that maybe there's a lack of knowledge, and if we have formalized processes, then there's a place for them to access that as well. But I do think that we need a little bit of formalization.
Can I ask you a question? And I don't know if you know the answer to this. Was there a refusal to refer to SLP, like or was there an SLP involved?
One family, it was a refusal not refusal. The child was in primary age group, so the SLP isn't going to come around for a while. Therefore, we wait till they're in grade 1 or we actually get support in terms of getting that those consults in kindergarten can hard, to say the least.
So that shouldn't be the case. If it is, then please ask them to let us know, because that is not, like, we have AAC devices in kindergarten classrooms. So I'm not sure what happened there, but that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, I only get the anomalies. I don't get the regulars, right? And like I said, by the time they finish, they're exasperated. Usually my first conversations are 2 to 3 hours, mostly allowing them to share their sides of the story from all aspects. And usually it's, I'm glad I did it. Thank you, Shauna, for letting me interrupt.
Yes, of course, no problem.
I just want to do a time check. It is almost 9 o'clock.
I'd just like to wrap up.
How many more questions?
I don't have any more questions. I just have kind of a parting thought that maybe I can leave with everybody.
Yes.
So I think the concerns we've heard around this issue aren't whether procedures exist in theory, but whether clear board-wide minimum expectations are defined, communicated, and implemented consistently, so that families and staff understand what students are entitled to in every setting. Given the importance of communication, access, for safety, regulation, and learning, I intend to bring forward a motion at a future SEAC meeting requesting board-wide guidance to address these areas of inconsistency, including AAC continuity, backup communication access, transition supports, and assessment accommodations. I really appreciate all of the discussion around this today, and just want to ensure that system level gaps being raised are accurately reflected for the record.
All right. I was going to say, can you send that, because I didn't write fast enough, but it's okay, it's recorded, so I'll be fine.
It's good. No, thank you. This is kind of the point of why we're all here.
Yes.
To make the system better.
And I appreciate the feedback, because you can't make change if you don't have it, right? So
yeah. And I think that, Shauna, you're seeing kind of what all said in various forms across the years, is that there's a lot of really good ideas and things at that top system level. It's just the execution when you push it across the entire system, it's not consistent enough. So you don't have that consistency of execution. But from school to school, from year to year, from administrator to administrator, every parent has had that issue where it was fine this year until I went to that year. Or why are you having such a hard time? My teachers are great. It's the consistency of application and execution is not there. And that's the frustrating part, that we should not have to have the level of advocacy in some cases where I never had a problem. Why are you having that problem? That shouldn't be a thing. So that's part of why we're here. But again, okay. I think so. There are 2 other ones. Community concerns. Can we push them to next month, just in the interests of getting out of the front?
they both actually have a connection to February 10th. So,
but we did talk about the February 10th.
Yeah. So what I'll say is I can answer more fulsomely next time about additional pieces, but if families, one of them was around supports in mainstream, and the other was around an SEAC member really wanting to know more about resources and pathways available to parents. We have sessions running on February 10th that address those directly, very specifically. So happy to add additional information next time, but if they're interested, February 10th would be an amazing place to get answers to some of those pieces.
Okay, then, moving on to celebrations and successes. Does anybody have any celebrations of successes?
What? I don't have a workshop. If people are interested, we talked about students, just pull out. We talked about students' anxiety and so forth, and Leger put out their study, Canadian study, around basically which is a research company. It's called Next Gen, and they did a survey across Canada of basically Gen Z, but also Gen Alpha, which is Gen Alpha 12 to 15 and whatever. And so it was really interesting because one of the things that was really interesting about it is that they are aware about social media and the impacts and so forth, and they're fairly resilient. But it's just interesting how they do it. But one of the key factors said that 36% of our youth basically see the web as a source of stress, which was really, but when this is that 3/4 of young Canadians say they're happy, but 37% feel lonely at least once a week. And that's both of them. If you look at the Alpha and, Alpha's less, it's 22%, but the Gen Z is 41%. 49% have experienced periods of depression. And then, it's 57 for the Gen Z, but 21%, 12 to 15, they're a little bit younger. They don't quite have the same experience at this point in time, but and 75% have experienced periods of anxiety. Those are huge numbers as far as stuff and
I feel to see how this is as a celebration or a success.
No, but I'm just saying it's a really good report, and just taking that into consideration. And we're looking at it's not a celebration site, but it was a really good article on that. Again, it is linked in my report, my Oxford report, but I think it's something that is really useful for everybody to understand. The biggest thing is that they're saying that, despite all the stuff, they're resilient. Despite all the stuff, they are resilient. That's one of the positives out of it. So it was really interesting, but I think it's a really, really interesting study to look, and I'll send the link as well. But just forgot to mention it as well. One of the sessions I went to.
You did?
Yeah.
I don't have an Adam story. I have a James story.
Oh, I do have a story.
Do you have a story?
I do have a story. Donut time.
Donut.
Because last weekend was Tim Hortons special donut time, right? And so so a special donut time. And so part of the thing is that we had our athletes go to to stores within Durham region, and they were selected stores that wanted to participate. We had so my daughter, as well as a couple of the athletes that are going on to nationals, but Durham athletes. One is a well-known athlete, person here that his name's Elliot. We talked about Elliot before. He is an athlete. He's a rugby player. Has gone to World Games. He was whatever, but anyways, he's one of our athletes as well. Anyways, so they took turns going through, and they served at the drive-through. They served at the counter and also decorated and made donuts. And so they had a really, really great time. Durham Region Police Force is very much a supporter of Special Olympics, so we had police officers there as well doing the donuts, and then they just had a really, really, really great time. I know that across Canada was a very successful thing, but the best part about this was that this time Tim Hortons particularly focused on ensuring that the athletes are there and getting them up and involved and so forth. And so we're showing some great pictures, of my daughter serving stuff, whatever. But what was also very interesting was that at one point in time talking to basically Elliot's mother, she said, "Wait a second, you've done Edwards. You're a trustee, aren't you?" She goes, "I contacted you when my son was at this school, and you helped me advocate and get the resources for my child." And so and it was so funny because it was a long time ago. But it was just a really good story in that every person around this table, they just know that you're here and it does have an impact and people do remember. I thought it was cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
That's fun. I'm very pleased to announce that my son James is now a certified level 1 CAD ski instructor. I am too, but I'm more proud of you. So for anybody who doesn't know, CADS is the Canadian Adaptive Snow Sports Program. So we run, they run all over Ontario, but we run out of protocol. So we spent 3 weekends running into sit skis and trying to pretend that we know how to ski without riggers, and had a fantastic time in the cold. And so we now have our certification on that. So it's so proud of that kid. I'm infuriatingly good at skiing, but as most teenagers are, there's to their best. So, but that's gonna be awesome. So he's able to now help with some of the instructions and helping our athletes and our skiers actually progress to independent skiing, which is fantastic. So success. All right, then. Nothing else? Anyone else? Okay, next SEAC meeting is going to be March 5th, 6:30, right here. Could I get a motion to adjourn? Donna, second. Donna, all here. Bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.